Good morning. Please turn with me to Job, let's say the 28th chapter. Sounds good. I don't know. Job, the 28th chapter, as we consider the subject this morning, understanding. Yes, the 28th chapter would be a great place to start in this chapter where we are going to talk about the ways in which, as we mentioned before, Job and his friends are all confused. They're all confused. And over again, we talk about these themes that resurface because it seems like Job is in a period of his life where if you have ever been to the beach, you get to see the waves come in and crash against the shore. That isn't any normal time. However, if you ever know what it's like in times of high seas or where we come from in hurricane country, in addition to fire country, the sad thing about what's going on in Maui right now is they get both. They're now understanding fire season a little bit more. I understand they have a fire season too, but they also are in a land where they can know a whole lot about hurricanes if they're not careful. And so in hurricanes, there are times when seas are relatively rough and things that are good at floating on top of the seas aren't quite as good at staying on top of the seas anymore. They go under and they sink. We said that's a metaphor for Job because it seems like the waves of life are crashing against him periodically as he's gone through now round 3 that we're in, and his friends trying to help, but it's not going so well. It seems like their words of comfort are actually dragging him under even further. But Job continues to resurface. And we said it's not just that Job continues to resurface. There are some parts of his character that we are seeing resurface, even as his doubts about God and God's fairness continue to seem to be dashed under the waves. And one of the things that continues to resurface about Job, we got a chance to talk about in a men's meeting yesterday, is his integrity. That's one of those words that's going to come up again here. It started out early in the Word of God. As we said last week, it's always great when I have a perception of myself that's accurate, but it's even better when my self-esteem matches God's esteem for me. See, because I can have a level of esteem for myself that is simply inflated and just no good. And on the other hand, there are times when my self-esteem can be way too low. Both have dangers. The immediate appeal of having low self-esteem is I don't have to go through the shame of being too proud or outwardly too proud. It's one thing if I'm just proud and everybody else thinks, yeah, he really is what he says he is. But it's another thing if I'm the only one in the room who thinks I'm something and everybody else gets it. No, bud, no. That's a certain level of shame, right? But having too little self-esteem also comes with a certain level of baggage because it's still not true. And even if I don't see the disadvantage of that level of untruth, God doesn't say there's certain types of untruth that are good. No. We see him permit certain types of untruth to exist. The lying spirit that went out into the mouth of Ahab's prophets. Was that good? No. Well, good because Ahab got judgment, but was it good that Ahab had judgment? In a perfect world, we don't have to have judgment at all. We can just turn at God's rebuke, meaning Ahab could just listen to the actual prophet that came to him telling the truth, right? And so in the ideal, we simply turn at God's subtle and not so subtle signs that it's time for us to make a change. But there are times in my life, like we said, much like it can be good to have a lower sense of myself and my potential than I should. That still has a flip side because there's a young man who is going to come through at the end of these speeches. We mentioned him before by the name of Elihu, and he had a little bit too, much self-deprecation going on. Because as we've already mentioned, he is the young man who God did not rebuke after his speech. As a matter of fact, he acted as kind of an introduction. I told you guys, sometimes I will press on a speech in YouTube. And one of the things I hate is when it doesn't get right to the point. I want to hear him start talking right away and they end up getting a preamble. It's like 15 minutes long. And all I got is 10 or 15 minutes of patience. And the preamble's longer than what I wanted to get out of the video I clicked on. It seems like Elihu is going to introduce God, but he's going to do it in a way that God actually appreciates because God is going to quote his hype person, his hype man, or the one who introduces him in the way he actually speaks to Job. And so what Elihu realizes early on is I sat and I listened because I didn't think that I was qualified to speak. But now that I've heard y'all, I'm a little bit more confident, right? So sometimes the young people might sit here and be like, I don't know if I want to speak. But then they get to hear us talking, they're a little bit more confident because the same God that gave us the ability to notice stuff, he can speak to them too, right? And so that's what we saw out of Solomon. Was he the oldest of all his brothers? No, we talked about it before. But for some reason, he was the one that God blessed with the wisdom, maybe because he asked for it, yeah? And so he wasn't the oldest. And we've seen the Bible Project talk about that too. Early on in our studies, we noticed that there was a pattern. It's not always the eldest that gets the title, right? Oh, because Joseph was the oldest of the brothers. No, they sold him into slavery because he got out of place, right? He had a lot of talents and they didn't want him to have the gifts that he had. But even in trying to suppress the gifts, they simply pushed him on further into what God had. Oh, wait, God gave him the gifts that could not be suppressed, right? And so likewise, David, oldest brother, right? No, we've seen it before. There's a pattern in Scripture where we get just enough normalcy to say, yes, it typically does pass on to the oldest because there is some wisdom in having more time. There's some honor that they didn't make it up. God said the honor goes to the oldest, right? But he says that also has to come with a certain level of responsibility, and that's what Elihu is understanding. We don't want to be too self-deprecating. Marcus, you're making that up? No. Paul literally says to Timothy, I'm not going to stay there with you, bud. We got a couple of churches that need help. But don't let them disregard you because of your youth, right? Because God can bless you too. And he doesn't need a hierarchy in order to plant that wisdom. And so that's what we're seeing here with Elihu. It can be good to make sure that I don't have an inflated sense of who I am and what I'm able to do, but I don't want to take a step backward when God is telling me. Not only do I have the ability to step forward, but that is the role that he has dedicated and designated for me. And so we want to have, as we said, not only not too high a self-esteem or too low a self-esteem, we want to understand the God esteem, something that we, from time to time, I borrow from the teachers at Sunset, one of them in particular. I'll name him Brother Charles Spear. It was great at making sure we knew that our God esteem was much more important than our self-esteem. That's what we see here. Elihu was wise to take a break, but he was wise to make sure that he did not need to stay silent that whole time because he had some things that needed to be heard. Why? Because they did not get to the full understanding. As we get to the end of the three friends trying to encourage Job, they're all done. By the time we get to chapter 25, like we said, we had round one of those friends trying to encourage Job. Didn't work so well. Round two of all three friends trying to encourage Job. Now that we're in round three, like we said in class, they fizzle out. We don't have 3 speeches here. We got one. We don't even have 1.5. We got a 6-verse chapter where one friend's just like, you're icky. That's pretty much it. He literally calls me. Turn back to chapter 25. The last thing that he says, the last thing that the second out of the third friend says, because the third is like, I don't got anything to say anymore. Verse 6, chapter 25. How much less a man who is a maggot and the son of a man who is a worm. Understand, we said there's a pattern. They're speaking in generalities, but Job gets it. Buddy, you're talking in generalities, but you're talking about me. You don't feel so offended about that because you're not pointing it at you. You're speaking about generalities of mankind that you're bringing out in my character. And so he's basically calling Job icky, and that's the last word on the subject. That's as complicated as it gets as they sign off. And so back to chapter 28, one thing that Job is going to understand is that, look, even though I've given my opinions about what's going on and my friends have given their opinions about what's going on, chapter 28 is a discussion of man can find gold in the deepest parts of, not the deepest, but deep parts of the earth. They can turn up parts of the earth that even animals rarely tread to find value in things that just look like stones or just dust. They can uncover things that dwell in dark places that don't usually even get God's light, and they can illuminate those places. But where are they going to find wisdom? Where are we going to find wisdom? And that's the thing that he understands on his sickbed. No matter what my opinion is about my circumstance, I still don't completely get it. But I do know that there is a place where we can potentially find it. The very last verse of the chapter says, as he's already started in verse 23 to say God understands the way to it, he's going to finish up by saying in verse 28 something that sounds very similar to what Solomon ended up Ecclesiastes with, where he says, and he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil is understanding. Oh, it sounds so simple. I say that and you're like, oh, well, of course. God's good. We hear it all the time. Used to say jokingly in youth class, one of my funnier kids used to always say, Jesus is always the answer. Yes, he is always the answer. But however, we got in the Bible because we got some more specific things that he has told us in the way of wisdom that can help our lives. And the thing here that connects back to what they're actually going through in this discussion is the fact that there's, like we mentioned last week, the fact that they have not, in the last clause, turned away from evil. might have a lot to do with why the three friends are still struggling in the understanding. How do we know, Marcus? How do we know? Please go back to me. Let's just take a survey of all three of these as we go back to Job chapter 4 and look at where it all begins. After in chapter 3, Job laments his birth and starts basically opening with that theme, why did I not die at birth? In chapter 4, Eliphaz is going to step up and try to, I guess, encourage him by basically saying in verse 17, the theme that's going to carry through, we talked about it a little bit in class, can mortal man be in the right before God? It's going to start off a series of generalized allegations. Job, it starts off, this week we talked about, be careful confusing questions with answers. That sounds ridiculous, right? Why would you need to say that, Marcus? Well, because there are times when I don't have a specific answer, but I have a really intelligent sounding question. And sometimes if I get so fired up on how smart my question sounded, I can confuse that question with an actual answer, especially if you can't answer it. Now I'm feeling even smarter than you, right? Because I thought up the question at least, even though none of us has an answer. But what the friends are doing is they are replacing a specific allegation with a question. How can anyone be right before God, Job? Does that mean that Job is not blameless? No, because God has literally said, as we said back in the first two chapters, he's still blameless. But for whatever reason, they're starting down a path where they need to, like we said, there are times when I just want to have the answers and I just don't. Like there are times when people are going to ask me, what's going on with your car, sir, when I take it to the mechanic? Do you think I want to look like I don't know what's going on with my car to these folks who know the car and the ins and outs? No, I want to sound like I have at least as good an idea as I can. And so I can tend to try to ramble on, be like, see, okay, now it's the carburetor, and blah, blah, blah. And you don't know, bud. You don't know. Just tell us what the noise sounds like, right? And so that's what's going on here. It seems that in a situation where nobody really understands what's going on, we are trying to figure it out when it's really operating at a level none of them are familiar with. And so they're starting out with questions. They're right. You're right. Nobody can be right in relationship to God. That's a huge difference, but that doesn't mean we all walk around guilty of each other's sins. No. You got some stuff that you did that's real good that I don't get credit for. I've got some stuff that I've done that's real bad that you shouldn't be blamed for. We're not all in the same boat. And so part of being able to help people is understanding the specific way in which they are struggling. And that's what his friends are not letting go of. The fact that they don't really know why Job is specifically going through this. And they're still trying to help, just like I'm trying to help my mechanic understand what's going on with my car, that's why I brought it there. If I could fix it myself, I kept it at home. You think I want to come off with thousands of dollars just because I already know? No, I need help and I just need to come in, shut up, and let them diagnose it, right? And so to a certain degree, that's their friend's job here. They're starting out with generalized accusations that really aren't based on a whole lot. So as we saw, that first round end up, Job's pretty much going to start to poke holes in that kind of generalized questioning that passes a lack of knowledge off as knowledge pretty quickly. Why? Because if you turn forward to chapter 6, he is going to simply say, as we've been talking about for a few weeks, verse 24, teach me and I will be silent. Make me understand how I have gone astray. Verse, like we said, chapter 6, verse 24, verse 25 going on too. How forceful and upright words. So how forceful are upright words. But what does reproof from you reprove? He's basically saying, literally show me what I did, bud. And you're reproving. This thing is, that whole concept, like we said, reproving requires proof. Proof means you got something to reprove over again. And so he's asking them for specifics that they just don't have. Why? Because the short answer would have been Bildad in chapter 8 when he speaks, no, Job, this is what you did. But no, they all go through rounds of generalities. After which, if you do me a favor and turn to chapter 10, before Zophar finishes up that first round, Job is going to say, it's not just you that I want answers from, it's God. Because I don't blame you for not necessarily having an answer to my questions. What I would like is just like I would hope in my time of counseling, I would hope that I would learn, like we said, to be able to take the car into the mechanic and simply be patient enough to wait however long I got to wait for those answers before I start trying to spout off on what I think it is. He's saying that same thing. One of the things that one of our brothers noticed yesterday is even while Job's friends are arguing at Job, Job is able to address them but not lose sight of the fact that he knows that Toyota has the answers to what's going on with his car. He knows that God is the one that ultimately has the answers to what he's going through. And that's what he's going to say in chapter 10, verse 1. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend against me? Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands and favor the designs of the wicked? He's not going to stop there. He's not going to stop there. Chapter 13. After Zophar does make his third response in that first round, chapter 13, verse 23 is going to say, how many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me know my transgression and my sin. Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy? I guarantee you he's not talking to his friends, as we've said. Once again, Job is able to focus. And so just like we said at the very beginning, there are certain things about Job's character that no matter how overwhelmed he might be by the grief and the loss and the criticism, the thing that keeps coming back to the surface is that he believes God not only can answer his questions, but that he will, hopefully, at some point, give me a hearing. And that's one of the things that we are seeing in Job's character that carries forward to us. Because why? Like we said, it's so easy to understand. Of course, because we got to keep faithful to God. It's written all over the Bible. But like we said, when I get home and things get difficult and the waves begin to inevitably bury over my belief that God is actually treating me fair. Maybe you're not like me. You never doubt that. You never doubt that? Okay. Right. Like the kids, like we said, the young people, they don't have to be here today. They're like, we showed up today. We don't have to be here. And he's still crazy. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to laugh. Right? Could you give me a non-crazy Sunday, Marcus, please? And so that's the cool thing, right? And so there are times in life when we just don't understand. And so that's okay, because it actually, life functions typically above our understanding. And so one of the things that happens is the more we embrace the fact that we will have times that our understanding just ain't enough to explain what's going on, the more we will be able to, as we've talked about in weeks past, look at Job as an example of eventually there comes a break in the waves, and God willing, in the times of peace when the waves are not so strong, what do you think it's like if you got buoys planted out offshore, but all you have to do, you throw them out there, you never manage them? You just kind of neglect them. They're always going to float. That's salt water out there, bud. I'm sure buoy material is better now than it has been over the years. Maybe we can leave them for longer, but that requires some innovation. Deciding that we're going to try to build them with better and better material. That until we build them with better and better material, we're going to make sure that we maintain them and care for them, because they have an important role of making sure that they do whatever buoys do. I don't know the seas that well, right? But they got some purpose. Lighthouses, the same thing. Some of my favorite movies right now are about those old school lighthouses and how they go off on ships. Why? Because when I first came back from overseas on the mission field, I was a security guard. And a lot of the things they did back in the day to man lighthouses had a lot to do with what we did as security guards. To basically make sure that even though we didn't have a highly esteemed job, we just make sure, like referees at a game, if you don't notice them, that means everybody else is able to do their business without having to worry. And so the lighthouses, it's the same thing. It's the constant maintenance that allows them to have their value. But neglect makes it more likely that when those seas get rough, you're going to actually have a greater catastrophe than you would have if you simply maintained the ship. And that's what we're seeing coming out of Job's character. See, he doesn't have time to necessarily, we don't see, I don't know, maybe it's here. He's flipping through the scriptures to be like, can you bring me that scroll from, or this one? No. It's just in Job that in this particular set of difficulties, this is what I still know. And no matter how angry I might get at God, at the end of the day, I still trust that he might answer me, even though he seems like my enemy right now. Next time God brings you to a situation where it's okay to say it. Sometimes young people, God willing, hopefully you ain't got there yet, where you feel like God's your actual enemy, but you might get there. You might get there, because life ain't easy. And not only is it not easy, sometimes it feels like you get to times where, man, it'd be great if I could pick up the phone and talk to such and such. Or in Job's situation, more importantly, I wish I could just get rid of everybody around me and just have a quiet moment, right? But sometimes neither will bring a remedy. Neither picking up the phone will bring a remedy, nor the company that you've actually got will bring a remedy. And so now you just got to wonder, God? And sometimes that's as complicated and as articulate as my prayer can get. It's just, because if I say anything, I might just make a larger mess. And Job gets there too. He's like, I'm scared to say anything, because if I say the wrong thing, I'm scared you get me even worse. And in that assumption that you'll get me even worse is the assumption that God is the one who's doing it to me. And that's what we said before. The mistake here seems to be that Job thinks that God is the one who's attacking him. And so when we get to that place where, of course, when days are sunny. It's not raining. We're not in fire season. It's easy for me to feel like I'm not being attacked. But what do you think about those folks in Maui right now who've never seen it that bad? And now you think, I've already heard some of the reports, now that they're getting into that circumstance where they're trying to find, okay, well, why did this happen? They're like, well, you know why it happened. We've been fighting about this on the island for a long time. We've been marching a course that leads more and more like this. This is not our first fire season. And so now that's when the infighting can begin, right? And then there are those who don't necessarily know the history of the circumstance, that they might not necessarily know that there is a logical progression of decisions that might or might not have led us away to this point. It might just look like God is just really the one who has done this, because our mind grapples for understanding in places where we don't often get it. And see, the friends, the problem isn't here that they're just necessarily evil people. Like we said at the very beginning, they seemed like they showed up wanting to help, as we talked about again in class this morning. But sometimes my greatest tragedy is not in being wrong, it's not letting go in the face of better information. And so that's what's happening right now with Job's friends. They are at a crossroads. As Job is bringing up questions that they can't answer. Okay, what did I do wrong? They're not letting go. And so in the next round, the second round of questioning, we've already mentioned that they double down. This time, instead of coming up with some specific evidence, they're going to offer theories. Since Job has mentioned that whole thing about what happens to the wicked, well, now we'll give you an idea of what happens to the wicked, Job. Look here, this is what the wicked do. The only problem is it's going to seem like all they're doing is looking at Job and creating a great big old theory about wickedness just from looking at Job. You know what? Hey, what did he do again? Okay, he's suffering now. He lost all his kids. Well, we can lose all their kids, Job. And what else happened? Lose all their stuff? Yep, lose all their stuff. Or not just from raiders, fire from heaven. We could suffer fire from heaven. And so it's just basically them not being very creative. They're just looking at Job and saying, okay, this is what happens to the wicked. But Job, as we move forward, he's going to basically have a question that he raises, as we mentioned, problems for that too. Okay, chapter 21 was dedicated at the end of that second round of berating. But here's a problem, bud. Like we said, on your way home, good luck just greeting everybody you see on the road as if there are no wicked people who aren't suffering the things that I'm suffering. Because if God simply quickly deals with the wicked right on time with their wickedness, why is it that there are so many people that you need to be careful of on your way home from fixing Job? Something we've noticed in past lessons. And so that second round of not letting go means, much like me, if I go to a situation and, if I'm taking my car into the dealership and I start saying some things that makes the person who's doing my intake in the service department look at me kind of funny, sometimes I can just let go and be like, I really don't know anything. Dude, can you just look at it? I'm hearing this noise. No, sometimes I'll run to plan B and I'll be like, okay, well, what I was able to Google tells me that, right? And so then I'll start trying to become an expert off of Google. And so instead of just trying to be settled with the fact that I've been embarrassed by the fact that I didn't know what I was talking about, sometimes I'll get on my phone and try to fix my expertise and try to become a theorist. That is what Job's friends are doing here. They're not letting go. And so once it's become clear that they don't have any specific things to accuse Job of, because God has the cheat code, he's blameless and he didn't do anything to deserve this, they're not going to move on. They're going to move further and further into that line of reasoning. So no, we can figure this out, Job. We can figure this out. And so that brings us to the third round where we are today. The third round where they're three guesses. Do they let go? No, they don't let go, right? They just make it a little bit worse because they're like, okay, now that we've had time to think, we've had 2 rounds to think, Eliphaz gets it. Okay, you challenged us to say what it is that you've done, Job. Here it is, chapter 22, verse 6. For you have exacted pledges of your brothers for nothing, and stripped the naked of their clothing, and you have given no water to the weary to drink, and you have withheld bread from the hungry, and the man with power possessed the land, and the favored man lived in it. You have sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless were crushed. Therefore, snares are all around you. We got it. Then that sounds specific, right? Like they messed up before. Because before, all they did was say, well, Job, nobody can really be righteous before God. Now they got specific stuff. Oh, my goodness, Job's in trouble. Job is in super trouble. Oh, except for the fact that, what does Job keep doing? What does Job answer? Chapter 23. We went through this in class, verse 3. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, speaking of God, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Because in verse 7, he's going to say, there an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever. by my judge. See, whether Job knows it or not, whether or not there is a law of Israel or not, there was this thing that was important all the way up through the time of Christ. Oh, wait a minute. It's important even today. When you go into a courtroom, we have this thing called the Constitution that says you have a right to confront your. Exactly. Job has no accusers. So no matter how specific the allegations get, no matter how persuasive the charging instrument sounds, you got to have some evidence, bud. And it at least has to come in the form of some people who saw what you done, that you're accused of doing wrong. And that's what they're still missing. See, they're, at least on some level, they understand the basics of a functioning fair society as much as Job does. Why? Just get yourself out of the Bildad seat and put yourself in the Job seat. Do you really want a court system where people can just come in and say you did it, no, guilty? No, you don't want that. But you're not struggling from Job's perspective, so you don't care as much. And so now when we're getting back to chapter 28, God is able to say that part of the reason why you're not understanding chapter 28, verse 28, like we said before, and he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to turn away from evil, that is understanding. You don't have to have the law of God. You don't have to have the law of Christ to understand. Golden rule is real simple. The way you want to be treated, that's the way you treat other people. It's a fundamental that helps you understand. If you're being fair, your eyes might be opened a little bit more to what is actually going on. And so the thing that the three friends are missing is they're offering up their generalized accusations in round one. And then in round two, they're offering up their Google theories about what wickedness looks like. And then in chapter 3, now they're like, okay, we got broken allegations. Now we got better allegations. They're still never coming to the right answer because it's something our sisters might be able to relate to a little bit more than us. There's a counseling term in terms of when counselors are talking to us and trying to help us get to our core issues. They say you have to make sure that you're not simply changing your makeup, that you're not simply putting on something to cover the old spots, but that you are fundamentally changing what is going on underneath whatever the makeup might be. And the reason why Job's friends are continuing to make the same mistakes is all they're doing is changing the makeup as Job brings up new problems. They are not fundamentally turning into fairness. They are not putting themselves in his perspective. And therefore, they are continuing to make decisions based on the bad model they've always used before, which basically suggests that they don't love Job like they love themselves. They're not giving him the fairness that they would want if they were in that sick bed. It's not that complicated. Why? Because it's not an IQ test. It's not fair if we can't all find a way to be just and fair. And so what we're seeing is when Job is saying here that the only way we can really understand is, first of all, to fear God. And why? Because he's not just telling us some generally nice stuff, right? We say it's a lot of the time. That he is helping us understand the simple things that can help open our minds to deeper truths. And that is one of the reasons why by the time we get to the end of this story, even though both Job and his friends have said a lot of wrong things about God, Job over and over again, he is going to say, please back up to chapter 27. Chapter 27. This is going to combine that whole concept of he still feels that God is beating up on him, but still. Chapter 27, verse 1. And Job again took up his discourse and said, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right till I die. I will not put away my, there it is, integrity. That term that, like we said, the seeds were bad in chapters 1 and 2. But God, go back. I know. Sometimes I talk too fast and I mess stuff up because I don't have a mind for quoting scripture like I need to, like I used to have. So let's turn back to the beginning. Where we saw that whole integrity thing. It's one of those times, like we said, there are some times when I would prefer God not mention my name. Even though I like a pat on the back, I know sometimes a pat on the back comes with knives to follow, right? So there are times when the attention I get is not the attention I want. But going back to Job chapter 2, God is giving him some great attention. Verse 1. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? Oh, Lord, please. Sorry, that's my ad lib. That there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his, whoa! Okay, that was a little more contrived that time, sorry. He still holds fast his integrity. Understand, there is no direct communication between God and Mrs. Job, but Mrs. Job is still going to notice something about Job as well. Verse 9 of that same chapter. His wife then said to him, after Satan was given the chance to touch Job directly as opposed to just the things around him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Famous line, curse God and die. And so as things get worse and worse for Job, that part of his character, that buoy that continues to resurface is his integrity. And the thing we noticed about the integrity is Job cannot make an appeal to God based upon his sinlessness. Like we said before in the first 2 chapters, it's going to notice in chapter 1 that in all this, Job did not sin. But later on, it's going to say that in all this, Job did not sin with his mouth. And that is a key distinction. How do we know? How do we know? We're still in chapters 1 and 2? Okay, chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 1, verse 22. Chapter 1, verse 22. In all this, round 1 of his challenges, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Well, now we've gone far enough to know that's different. Well, how do we know? Chapter 2, verse 9. After his wife says, curse God and die, verse 10 is going to say, but he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive from God? Shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin. Sister said, with his lips, with his mouth, right? And so we're seeing Job chipped away at by all of those challenges. And that's why we named a lot of these chapters and these short lessons, chipping away. Because just as, like we said, we're using a new metaphor now, life is beating against him with these waves. We're going to lose some things. We're not going to look as good in these pews as we do in real life in real time when the pressures add up. But the good thing is that Job is giving us an example that to the degree we can hold on. We'll say in your time of personal study this week, maybe go through those terms for integrity. Don't just take the preacher's word for it. If you got some time to study this week, do a word search on integrity and look at how it comes up. And then if you get real curious, go look it up in the Hebrew, in the Greek, because the preacher can tell you that in context where we're at in the reading this week. Okay, let's just finish up there. Back to the reading this week. I know we're all over 28. Here we go. All over the map. We'll finally finish up at some point, I think. I guess. Here we go. In verse 5, we saw Job talking about his integrity. What does he attach it to? Let's look at some context clues. Wait, my lips, verse 4, will not speak falsehood. My tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are in the right. He's talking to his friends there because he said, I will not put away my integrity. Well, what else does he say? I will hold fast. What else is attached to integrity? Oh, wait, my righteousness. And I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me. Understand that by the time we get to the end, Job is going to have a conversation with God where he's going to start to realize some of the things that he thought he was right in saying, he's not so right. So understand, part of our integrity isn't always telling the truth, even when we commit to it. Because sometimes we're just going to see stuff wrong. But how does Job respond when he is confronted with his wrongdoing and his error? Oh, wait a minute. That might be one of the reasons why when God gets here, he does not condemn Job, but he condemns his friends who, through 3 rounds of being confronted with the ways in which they were wrong, they simply wouldn't let go of their opinion. While they, in order to hold on to their opinion, they had to let go of their integrity. The difference with Job is his opinion was something he was willing to let go of so that he could hold on to his integrity. As God said, Job, I love you, but there's some things that we need to fix. And so when we look at Job essentially being a man imperfect, when he sees God being the kind of man who God, as we said before, looks at all of Job's mistakes and fixates or focuses on the fact that he maintained his integrity, one of the reasons why we want to hold on to our integrity is there's no way we can be perfect before God. Our brother asked in class this morning, what concept of grace did they have during this period of time? Well, it may be a whole lot like the one that we see out of Abraham, who immediately after getting the promise that he's going to have a kid, he's lying to save his wife because he thinks he's going to die right away. No. David, after he's been promised that he is going to be a king, he did really good up until the point where he got the throne and got a little bit of rest, and then all of a sudden his wives weren't enough. He needed a Bathsheba. None of these people lived perfect lives, but these are examples. The Bible is a great book of examples of how in days of visitation, when people made mistakes, his own people made mistakes that should have gotten him killed. What's the common thing with all of those situations? Abraham and giving his wife away. What's the penalty eventually for adultery going to be? It's death. We talked about it in class. The lying was one thing, but he really put himself in the position of putting a king who had taken his wife, right, because he thought it was his sister, in a position where he was going to commit adultery unknowingly with her. But Abraham was going to be guilty of that adultery too, so he could have died. David, we know the penalty for David because he literally took another man's wife. It's death. All of these people are in situations where before they become famous heroes of faith, they never had to get there. And so like we said in class, that whole concept of, well, is it grace or is it works? How much is it of what? It's ultimately that question of, look, you don't get to be the great hero that God is making you out to be if it's basically on your works. Why? Because there's some things I've done that I should already be dead, right? And so if God does something great for me, it's only because he has forgiven me along the path to my greatness. Therefore, the grace. Okay, we'll finish up. We'll finish up here. Promises. Galatians, where we ended up in class. So now you know there's hope, because this is where we actually did end up in class. Galatians chapter 3. No, sorry. Ephesians 2. In verse 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. It is not the result of works, so that none may boast. Job, you can't boast. God patted you on the back and told you to make a sacrifice for your friend's sins. Why? Because you made false statements about me too. But you've held on to your integrity in a way that encourages me not to fixate on what you did wrong, but the fact that there's still a whole lot of value in the way that you are following me. And so when we look at Job, and we look at the distinction between Job, who offers a sacrifice up for his friends, and his friends who basically were, it says, seeing God in his burning anger, understand letting go in many ways is the key to our understanding. Like we said, if we all got opinions, and I'm going to guarantee you, show of hands if all your opinions are right. Show of hands if you believe all your opinions are right. Now you're lying if you don't raise your hands now. You believe on some level, otherwise you wouldn't, at least the ones you say, right? I think they're all right. I think I'm right when I'm yelling at my TV. If you don't, then you just do it better than I am. But I think I'm pretty right. I think I'm pretty smart when I'm setting them straight. They can't hear me, doesn't matter one bit. And so we all share that struggle, I think, to a certain degree. But we begin to start growing, maturing into people who are holding on to our integrity no matter how life takes us under. The more we're willing to let go of our opinions, understanding that there's some things that God is trying to get me into a better understanding of. And that's what I think distinguishes Job from his friends. He's willing to let go of his opinions when God confronts him with better information. And so when it says, in our theme verse for today, the key to understanding is turning away from evil. A lot of times the key to my understanding is learning how there's still, even though I don't see it, a lot of evil still woven into my misconceptions about life and my integrity, the thing that makes God my advocate as opposed to the one who's coming to set me straight one day, is the degree to which in life I'm allowing him, or I'm eager for him to separate me from those opinions that are not only hurting me, but they're hurting the people that I might be trying to help. That's the worst thing. These people are here trying to help Job, and they're not letting God separate them from the opinions that are preventing them from being a decent counselor. And so with that, when I'm at my worst, I'm at motives I honestly don't want to help. I want to get even. I want to do wrong because I think you've wronged me. Oh, but to the degree I realize my wickedness not only makes me a danger when I'm angry and I want to get even, but when I'm trying to help. And like it says, our righteousness is as filthy rags. And I got to realize that even at my best, I need God to separate me from my opinions because I can't help if listen up. Even my best intention help is simply doing more damage if I haven't let go and let God clear me of my blind spots, which is why we often say God's best to you as you go forward in him.
Let's all stand.